All right, gang, we'll get started. What Darryl asked me to talk about was what's happening right now and the fact that blockchain, whilst it's been a big topic of conversation over maybe 2 or 3 years, is actually starting to be seriously used for some real big heavyweight uses now. And I've got to say, in IBM, we were in this game about 3 years ago. We built our own blockchain fabric about 3 years ago, and we thought this was going to be big, but we've been taken aback about how fast and how large it's got so quickly. And I'm going to talk to you today about a few cases, right? A few real cases that we're working on right now where customers are starting to put this into production. It's getting very exciting, I have to say. So, I'm not really going to talk about these sort of charts, right? These are very boring, right? These are the sort of charts where you see bars going up massively towards the future. It's going to be very important and blah, blah, blah in all industries, right? Which say in the future it's going to be big. But what I'd say is you don't need that anymore because it's here right now, today. And you might say, prove it, mate. Okay, you just stood there talking bollocks. Well, I'm not. Here's the evidence, right? So these are companies building stuff on blockchains right now. And these are just ones that IBM's working with, right? And I think there's two things which are really shocking for me. I've been involved in a number of startups in IBM. That's kind of what I've done for a few years, is within the big company, I've been looking after startup projects. And the key thing for me with this is there's some damn big names here. Some very important big names who would not risk their reputation on something which was a play project or a prototype, right? And the breadth across the industries is stunning, right? I've never seen a technology take off across multiple industries so quickly in my life, right? And I'm old. I've been working in IT in IBM for 33 years, right? So that's a long time. And I've never seen anything like this, right? I'm going to talk about a number of these cases here today, okay? If you want to know about any of the others afterwards, over a beer, come and collar me, right? Because I know about pretty much all of these. All right, but one of the things I'd say before I get into the description of how people are using it is one real learning that we've had is blockchain is really simple, right? Blockchain as a concept is super simple. It's a shared distributed ledger. That's all it is, right? And people hype it up and make out that it's alchemy or complicated, and it really isn't. The blockchain itself, that part, is a very simple concept, right? It's like TCP/IP. It's something that's really simple, but that empowers the internet. And blockchain is something really simple, but it enables virtual currencies and it enables transactions to change, okay? The difficult bit is all this other stuff. So for any of the blockchain fabrics out there, there's pretty much no development environments, no workbenches that are what you'd expect if you're developing an IT application, okay? And that's true of Ethereum, Ripple, Corda, or Hyperledger, where IBM is working, right? And that's a huge problem, right? You need development environments and workbenches so that you can get the acceleration and the consistency that you need. Because we're talking to a network of companies, right? Blockchain enables networks of companies to work together. You need to be able to govern that, okay? You need to get them to talk together, manage how they manage their blockchain, and there's no tooling for that, right? There's no requirements management. We're having to relearn it all. And then you've got to operate the network, okay? And that's radically different from how IT works today. So we're relearning all of this. And 2018, for me, has moved from being hype and a future project into the year of production. I'll just put some names up here, okay? These are companies that are all moving into production this year. And you might not know these names. I'm going to talk about them in a little bit of detail. They're quite interesting, quite exciting, I have to say. And in each one of these cases, they're going to totally change the industries in which they work. A lot of companies will be really scared right now of being disintermediated or cut out of the businesses which they supply. Okay, if you're not adding a lot of value as a business now, technology like blockchain could cut you out entirely. So I'll explain what I mean a little bit more. Is there any questions so far? It's eerily quiet up there. I'm going to play a video to get us started, right? So this might be a bit simple for some of you, but I think it's a good way to understand what a blockchain application actually does. That's kind of cool, eh? So this isn't just a hypothetical project. This is something that we've just about finished building, all right? So the development for this started 6 months ago, and for those of you that know how we do this sort of development, we've been through about 20 sprints to build this out. Big development team, and it works beautifully, I have to say. Even though blockchain fabrics are very new, and most of them have just got to version 1, you can build stuff on them and productionize it, and it works in this kind of environment where you need it not to fail, right, and for it not to go wrong. So it's absolutely fabulous, I've got to say. So we, with Maersk, are building something out with the intent that other people can buy it. All right, so this is not like a typical IT project where they come to us and ask us to build something for them. This is a situation where we're building it together in a joint venture with the intent of other companies being able to buy this, and to just a simple goal. I think it says it up there somewhere, revolutionize global trade, right? So just a simple goal, you know, we'll set the bar low. And the initial feedback is incredibly positive, I've got to say. So it will change the industry for shipping, I have no doubt, okay? Okay, right, I'm going to talk about another one. This is WeTrade. So Maersk, whilst it's a Danish company, is being developed partially in the US, which makes it less interesting for us, right? Because we're good Europeans, and this one is an absolute European use case, right? And the #1 use case in the world for trade finance. Okay, so you see the names up in the top right-hand corner. There's a network of 7 banks there, including some very big names, who have agreed to work together to offer trade finance on a blockchain. Okay, so trade finance is typically a big corporate thing, right? You borrow a lot of money to finance your big projects, all right? In this case, what they're doing is trying to push down so that they can offer finance to much smaller companies. And this is one of the real dashboards from WeTrade, okay? So this lady here is running a fashion company, maybe a small one, maybe out of her own garage, right? Maybe it's a one-man band, all right? And what this WeTrade platform will let her do is manage her finance, manage her logistics, and manage all the interactions with the banks. Okay, so you can see that she's got some notifications here on the right, the activities, okay? And it tells her that she's received her payment, and then it'll tell her that the invoice discounting has been approved by the bank. It'll tell her that it's been shipped, and it does all of this stuff for her, right? It's very, very, very cool indeed. And this, again, is just about to be launched, all right? We've built it out. It was 16 sprints in this case. It took us about 5 months to build it, and it's ready to go, all right? And that network of 7 banks has now been joined, where are we? Oh no, I've not got it there. Don't worry, the network of 7 banks that were initially there has now been joined by 2 others already, So Santander that you know and Nordea that you might not, because they're from the Nordics, have joined. And we've got a queue of other banks wanting to join that, right? So it's very exciting, I've got to say. Now, for the clients, I thought I'd throw up some of the benefits for this. So it could apply to you, you know, if you run a small business now or you want to start one in the future, you'll be using something like this, okay? And it's got real super benefits even in version 1. For example, track and trace of all the logistics for your goods, right? Even if you're a small business that don't do this at the moment. Real-time settlement so that you get your money quicker than you've ever done before. And yeah, the trade press is making a huge splash about this. I don't know if you've seen the internet in the last 2 weeks. It's going crazy over this, okay? And what I'd say is the time from which the idea was mooted, right? So initially there's a bank called KBC who had the idea and came to us, and that was kind of the middle of 2017. So not very long ago. In that time, we've put together a consortium, we've formed a joint venture, we've built the thing, it's just about to be launched, and for a typical IT project, this is like 3 times faster than it would normally be. You know, it's crazy fast, right? And it's working. Okay, I've never known a startup technology be this quick to go real. Okay, it normally takes a long time, not in the case of blockchain. Okay. All right, and here's another one. I'm just going to talk about a few cases here for you. Anybody got any diamonds on them at the moment? It's one person. All right. How do you know it's authentic? How do you know it's a real diamond? How do you know where it came from? This might seem like a really stupid question. My wife and I got engaged a long time ago and recently had the engagement ring reset, right? Because she changed from gold to platinum because, I don't know why, because she told me she needed to, because you know, it was the wrong colour. And when we got the ring reset, it turned out the diamond that we bought in good faith from a reputable jeweller wasn't actually a diamond. All right, it wasn't glass or anything. It was a good, expensive mineral, but about half the price of a diamond, right? And we weren't to know. So that's a real problem. And Everledger, a company out of London, are putting together a blockchain that will give you the provenance of diamonds, right? So every individual diamond is as individual as a fingerprint, all right? And you don't need to laser etch a barcode into it or anything. You can just tell from the clarity and the colour, the imperfections in it. Everyone is individual. And they're putting together a blockchain that will tell you, if you scan a diamond, which mine it came from, when it was pulled out of the ground, which market it went through, if it was Rotterdam or somewhere else, and which jeweller sold it to who and for what price, right? And you'll know it's genuine. And you'll also know that it's not a blood diamond, i.e. it wasn't dragged out of the ground by a terrorist and sold to launder what they're doing. So another interesting use case, okay? And this is the last one that I'll talk about. So just to say, blockchains aren't all about companies working together or provenance. This is a French company, a French financial services company, who are using blockchain just within their own company, which you wouldn't have thought would be interesting, because don't you need a network of companies talking together for a blockchain? Well, in this case, no. What they're using it for is for know your customer, kind of CRM use case, all right? And what they're the sort of company who will give you a loan, sell you insurance, do your banking for you, all right? And typically those sort of companies, the different divisions don't know who you are, don't talk to each other, have different details about you. And they're using it to store all of their customer information, so it's stored in one place and it's all consistent, and there's no errors, okay? So it's that kind of use case. Now, this is my last slide before I'll hand to Sharon, just to warn you to warm up, do your exercises. I said 2017 was the year of hype, 2018 the year we moved to production, and already we're seeing 2019 as being the year of blockchains, all right? So you saw the Maersk example, right? The ship going from Mombasa to Rotterdam. That's kind of cool, it works really well. But the most important thing about it is once you've built a blockchain for that, there's all kinds of hooks in it that you can start to use for other things. So other blockchains can hook off that and they all interact together. And an example would be, so if that cargo was moving across the world and say it was, let's take a case of strawberries, okay? So they're being shipped from the Canary Islands to Europe, right? And it's being tracked on a blockchain, all kinds of benefits of doing that. But then you instrument the cargo, right? So you know the temperature at which those strawberries have been kept at the whole journey, how much vibration they've been subject to. So you know the quality of the shipment, right? It's really cool. And you can have a smart contract that determines the price of those strawberries when it arrives to the supermarket that's buying it, right? So if the strawberries have been above 6 degrees centigrade for an hour, then the supermarket pays 10% less for them. All right, that sort of thing starts to happen. It gets really interesting, and that's how we see 2019. It won't be the year of production blockchain anymore. It'll be networks of blockchains working together. Okay? Right, Sharon, I shall hand over to you. Do you want me to set you up?
Evening, everybody. I'm Sharon. I travel a lot, but only in the UK, so I should really be knowing which time zone I'm in. Like Andrew, I also work for IBM, but I'm our industry technical leader for travel and transportation. So the plan for me this evening was just to give you some examples of what we do in travel and transportation. Now, I knew Andrew was going to talk about Maersk, but I didn't know he was going to talk about refrigeration too. So he's stolen my thunder on a couple of things, but never mind. We'll go with it anyway, and I'll maybe just make a couple of extra comments. But what I thought I would do is actually start with a little bit about travel and transportation, rather than go straight into the use cases. I travel a lot for work. I'm on trains, planes, automobiles, the works, a lot. And I thought I really understood travel until I started focusing on the industry itself and realised that it's a whole level more complicated and more difficult and more slow than we thought it was. So I'll maybe just share a few of the challenges that the industry has. I got bored and started playing around with animations and things. So, yeah, travel organisations are finding it really hard. It's not an easy market to deal with. The globalisation stuff, low cost is really hard, particularly if you're a really legacy organisation like a British Airways, something like that. Even EasyJet can compete more easily with British Airways, and they're a legacy organisation these days as well. So cost and low cost being a real problem. For those who think that British Airways are buying Norwegian or want to buy Norwegian for the low cost element, I think it's for the slots. Don't think it's actually for the low cost, but that's just a personal perspective. Substitution, the thing that's really interesting. So people are buying VR headsets rather than go on holiday. So you can see things, you can see the wonders of the world with virtual reality without having to get on a plane. And frankly, sometimes when you've lost your baggage, it would have been better to stay at home anyway. So I think that's a particularly interesting story. The multimodal stuff as well. We've been talking about mobility as a service for a really long time. Has anyone heard the phrase mobility as a service? And by that I don't mean mobiles and cell phones. No, so mobility as a service is kind of the idea that whichever way you travel to work or to whichever thing you're going to today might be different to the way you went yesterday, and you're paying for an end-to-end service. But actually it's really hard. So if you're a train company, what do you do about that first mile, last mile problem? You know, getting people to the train station and then getting them from the train station to their office or to their home at the end of the day, or to the shops or wherever it is that they're heading. Mobility as a service it's a thing, we've talked about it for a while. and we're just really struggling to integrate because the travel or the transportation ecosystem is really complicated. I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of them later on. Some other stuff that's hard of security, physical and digital security, and that's where blockchain can sometimes get a bit interesting in there. You know, brands are absolutely made and lost on security and security failures. Whether people feel safe with a brand because of any security instance is really interesting, and also where we choose to go to in the world because of other security safety perspectives can have a real knock-on effect. So if a bomb goes off in somewhere in Egypt, for example, so think about Sharm el-Sheikh, suddenly people don't want to go there anymore. You know, Tunisia, people don't want to go there anymore. Now, if you're a travel organisation like a TUI or a Thomas Cook, and a good number of your hotels are based in those countries or in those cities, what do you do? How do you fulfil demand? How do you change the contracts with those hotels and move them on in a much more flexible way? It's actually really hard. And that top right one talks about cost. Travel organisations have been rewarded continually for cheapness, for not spending any money, and that's a real problem when you and me, we demand really good digital experiences these days. You know, we've got our phones, and what they say, your expectations are set to whatever your last good experience was. So we're demanding better and better experiences all the time, and the more we are disappointed, the more we start to lose faith in the companies that we're travelling with. Now, if you're having to travel between Edinburgh and Glasgow on the train, ScotRail's your only option. So it doesn't matter how much you tweet about them and how rubbish they are, you're still going to get on a ScotRail train. I may have complained earlier today, but there are some places where we have options as well. So it's really hard to be a travel operator, there are some things in blockchain that can make it a little bit better, a little bit easier. So. Oh yeah, I love this example. The telephone's really cool, but it doesn't work if you've only got one person. Well, it does, but it's a bit weird. So, and I just like that concept of comparing a telephone to blockchain. It makes it rather simple, I know. But you know, blockchain's not going to be successful unless you're talking about multiple organisations, multiple parties. You can build a blockchain within a company and use it successfully, but again, that's because there's multiple parties with different needs, and we're wanting to try and get rid of some of the silos. So, Maersk. The real problem with Maersk is paper. It was already mentioned on the film. So we're talking about around about 200 interactions between, was it 200? Yeah, 200 interactions, each with a set of documents for one container. If you're Maersk, some of your ships are quite big. Anyone want to guess how many containers a ship may have?
10,000.
Okay. Higher? Lower? Anyone?
100,000.
100,000? Not quite so many.
50.
50? Not quite so many.
20.
20, there we go. So round about 20. I think there's a number, 20, some of them are 19,735 or something like that, and some are 20 plus. But you know, 20,000 containers, 200 interactions per container, plus paper. I mean, my goodness, we're not doing ourselves a favour when it comes to things like trees and the environment. So I think something like blockchain, it's not just about some of the ability to share, but maybe there are some other interesting side effects as well, or benefits of doing something like of building a blockchain through the Maersk thing. So yeah, we announced a joint venture. It started actually as a prototype that we ran with them a wee while back, and they ran their prototype in conjunction with the old style as well, so that they could prove that it was successful and that it was going to make a difference, which is why we decided that actually it's a useful thing to do, and we have this sort of shall we say neutral part in this, but actually it can really make a huge difference, as the video showed. So I'm not going to go into great detail about how it works, because you've kind of seen that already. It is based on this thing we called global trade digitization, and it's basically just how we set up the contracts and the number of stakeholders and the parties and agreements amongst it. So a platform to get started with, which is built on Hyperledger Fabric. And I said it was about paper, but it's not really just about paper. It's about being able to see what's happening where where you are allowed to see what's happening with the right kind of information. And I guess that's where some of the permission stuff gets kind of interesting. And I'm sure we could have a long debate about one kind of blockchain platform versus another. But for us, this is a really useful thing in this scenario, being able to see certain things depending on who the role that you are playing in that particular supply chain. Regulators getting to see more than perhaps others, and so on and so forth. And also in air freight. So this is another prototype that we built with Emirates and Donata, which are, I can't remember what they stand for, but related to the Emirates organisation. So yeah, actually, and it's going to be a really similar use case and a really similar implementation of having contracts, chain code between different organisations. Stating what they can see, what they can't see, and on the a data model related to the sort of things that they're trying to achieve. And this is where the refrigeration story comes in that I was going to tell you. I should have popped the video in because we had a bit of a chuckle making it. So a couple of weeks ago I was on some training with some colleagues. So my role is usually more from an architectural perspective, so thinking what's the big picture, how do we get technology to fix that, should it sit in the cloud, what are the sort of, anyway, that's the sort of thing I usually do. But we do get our hands dirty with technology just to make sure that we're familiar with it, that we keep staying relevant, that kind of thing. So a few weeks ago, a number of us, when we're on education, and we're in teams of 4 or 5, and we all had to build something based on blockchain that fulfilled a use case. So we did one with refrigeration and we had great fun. So the idea was that you stick an IoT sensor of whatever type it might be. This one was looking at temperature within your refrigeration container and make sure that it doesn't drop temperature. So we stuck that sort of information together, used Node-RED to build integrate it with the blockchain, and yeah, we managed to get APIs for flights that were going over Lisbon, where we were at the time. So we synced it with the flights and pretended the containers were on the flights, and watched planes turn red as the temperatures got too hot for a certain period of time. And then, it gets to the point where you can automatically penalise the people that need to be penalised. If you're a farmer, a grower who has strawberries to send, then you shouldn't be penalised for the fact that your shipper hasn't been able to keep the temperature at the right kind of acceptable difference for the product that you have. So the shipper can be penalised for having faulty containers, faulty refrigeration. And the minute it happens, actually, if you are a supermarket, well, what's coming to me is not going to be lasting as long as it's supposed to last. In fact, it might already be bad by the time I can get it. So therefore, I'm going to start placing orders for more strawberries, so that we do have something on our shelves, because it's lovely in Glasgow at the moment and everyone's going to want strawberries and cream really quickly before it starts raining again. So that was the one we did. We had some colleagues who had a really, really similar idea and built a blockchain based around about medicine and being able to transport medicine. And similarly, how long has the medicine been at a certain temperature, and has it gone out with the limits that it should do, and how do we deal with that from a health perspective? So if you want to grab me later, I've got the video somewhere on my laptop, and you can have a view of it. We had a bit of fun making it. Loyalty. I travel a lot. Those are just some of my loyalty cards. I'm very pleased to say I'm now a silver member of British Airways. That makes me really sad. And by the way, so I might be loyal to British Airways. They are not loyal to me. It takes me, my loyalty year starts in July, and it's taken me from July to now to get 600 points to get to silver. It's 300 for bronze, then another 300 for silver. It's then 900 to gold. I am not going to do that between now and July, so I think I might start getting the train because it's much more relaxing. But yeah, loyalty. Hands up who has 1 or 2 loyalty cards with, 1 or 2. Do you use them very often? Are they always sitting there with their kind of points on them that you've never really paid much attention to? I never use my Netta card very much, if I'm honest, and it's collecting a few things. Yeah, and we don't use all this loyalty stuff we've earned ourselves. We just don't redeem our points, and that's an old figure. Back in 2013, anyone who was really obvious noted it is quite old, but it's actually pretty true today as well. We just don't use our loyalty points, and that's because it's kind of hard. you know, you've got to use your British Airways ones with this, and you know, there was the air miles thing, but who uses air miles anymore? Are they still valid? What if you've got 10,000 points with your IBIS, and you've got 10,000 points with Hilton, and actually you need 20,000 points to stay overnight in a Radisson? It's really hard. And so one of the areas that we're exploring is, can we use loyalty points as a way of bringing industry together? This one's happens to be thinking about airlines, but it might not just be airlines. So what if you were at an airport and you could use your points in a better way than you can today? Because it is hard to know what you can use them for. And the thing that really frustrates me is they might do really good deals on a flight from a cash perspective, but you won't get those deals if you're trying to use reward points instead. So actually you might end up just using the cash instead of your points, depending on your perspective. So the idea from a loyalty perspective is, what if we could join a number of the organisations up and allow you to use your points in a better way, so that you feel you're getting value out of them, and then actually you feel that not only are you being loyal to the organisation, but they're being more loyal to you because they're allowing you to have more freedom to use them. One of the other examples we're talking about is, you know, voucher management. You know, when you're at an airport and your flight is 3 hours late and you get a voucher for £5 to get a coffee and half a sandwich because the airport's really expensive. You know, what if they were able to start using things like blockchain to support that, whether it's your loyalty points or a slightly different voucher scheme? And part of the reason that organisations that are not airlines would be interested in this is airports make a lot of their money from retail. Can anyone guess what might actually be the most profitable part of an airport in most circumstances?
Duty free.
No, it's not duty free, although that can be good.
Pubs.
Pubs? No. What was that one, sorry?
Coffee.
Coffee? No.
Extra baggage.
No. For all the people who the thing can't hear more, there was extra baggage was suggested, coffee, pubs, car parking. Huge amount of money in car parking. But only if you've used the local app does the airport maybe know who you are. And even then, they probably haven't linked you to anything else. So the airport wants you to spend a lot of money in the shops, because normally when you buy something in the shop, they get something back from that. If they don't know you, they can't personalise stuff to you. Now, obviously, we've got a very interesting GDPR world now, starting tomorrow. But the airports do want a way to get to understand who we are better as individuals. And you're not going to download an app every time you fly from an airport, because you might not be at that airport more than once. So how else do they get information from you? If they can share it through a loyalty scheme, they get to know you, get to know what you'd like to buy, and it means that they can have much better retail offerings for you. Training and certification. This is a scary one. It's really hard to keep track of what people are certified to do. If you're a train driver, you have to be certified for bits of routes. And if you're on a route and there's something ahead of you, and therefore they're going to have to divert your train, if you are not certified for a certain piece of track on that route, you are not able to drive that train over it, which means your train could sit for a very long time until they either clear that obstruction, or they manage to get somebody else on the train who can drive it for you. It's a real challenge. And then if you're trained for driving a bus, that might not transfer to your next employer, that sort of thing. So we think there's a great use case here where third parties and certification providers can get involved and allow transportation organisations to know more about the people that are going to be working for them, or that are working for them. Frankly, it sits in an oil and gas kind of scenario as well, anywhere where safety and certification is really important. So another example there. This one, we ran a prototype or proof of concept with a company called RDW in the Netherlands, and won an award for it. And it's great fun, and it's round about being able to lock up your bike with a smart lock that knows where your bike is. Your bike is registered as part of a blockchain environment, and if somebody steals it, then we can think about automated claims to insurance, stuff like that. As individuals, would we be interested in this? Don't know. Maybe somebody like Transport for London would be. We should maybe speak to them about it. I don't know if we are. You know, Edinburgh's about to start coming with there are bikes here in Glasgow as well, aren't there? Yeah, Edinburgh's about to start using them as well. You know, maybe there's a scenario here where some of our providers like Circle could be interested. And again, I just like the idea of being able to make things slightly simpler for us as individuals by automating at least some of that process from an insurance perspective. perspective, rather than how difficult it is these days to claim for a lot of things. Asset management and maintenance. So whether well, I guess there's two scenarios here. For me, I think there's use cases round about maintenance agreements, and then there's one about the assets themselves, that or the things that the part. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's a 400 and something billion dollar problem round about counterfeit ball bearings. Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, there's a huge figure round about counterfeit ball bearings, and if they're counterfeit, that means that they wear much more quickly, or they could be faulty from the start. So I think certainly there's an idea there round about the provenance of a thing. But the maintenance one, and this is where I said I was going to talk about complexity, about travel and transportation. So ScotRail is a franchise run by the train operating company ScotRail Abellio. And they are known as TOCs. There's 23 TOCs in the UK. There's also Fox, freight operating companies, and they're the ones that send freight around the country on rail. These companies, they lease the trains from organisations called ROSCOs. They're rolling stock operators. There's not so many of those in the UK, far fewer than there are franchises. But yeah, so you lease, generally a ScotRail will lease their trains from a Roscoe. And then you've also got the Hitachi and the Siemens and the companies that make the trains that are bought by the leasing companies that are then leased to ScotRail and so on. Who's responsible for fixing the train if it goes faulty? Is it the TOC? Is it the Roscoe? Is it Hitachi? Well, it depends. It depends on the contract. It depends where they've got to. Sometimes it will be Hitachi, sometimes it will be ScotRail. It's really complicated. And then you get down to who's the individual to do it. Oh, and by the way, were they certified for being able to fix that particular component? And how urgent is it that it gets done? And how important is it that somebody signs it off? Because if you work in rail, you realise it's a hugely safety conscious industry, which is why things are so slow to happen, because they're so worried about safety. So there's a real use case here for about blockchain, about parties coming together. I'm not personally having many of those conversations right now because the environment is so crazy. We need to find out who's actually going to be happy to take ownership of it. But there's such an obvious use case for blockchain and joining people up. And of course, ticketing. So if you'd seen my title, I'd said travel and transportation. Blockchain in travel and transportation is not just about ticketing. Actually, there are use cases for ticketing, but I think that's boring, so I'm going to finish there. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's how you can find me. But obviously, if you want to ask any questions, then please feel free.
Two very quick questions. In fact, first of all, have you actually managed to sell it to supply chains that actually are using it in reality? You know, that you're in partnership with Maersk. Secondly, with that, how do you actually persuade the actors of the supply chain to engage with it? That's a good question.
So this is going to be interesting because we've got one mic, haven't we?
Yeah.
Do we need?
Maybe I'll shout.
This one's picking it up. See, it would be good to repeat the question anyway, but you get me on this.
So in the Maersk example, we're nearly ready to sell it, right? But we need to get authorization from trade bodies around the world. And we've got authorization from all countries apart from one, which is China. Okay. And we're waiting for China to accredit it, and then we can go. Everywhere else has said yes, the EU, US, everywhere. And at that point, the joint venture will start to sell it. Okay. So that's where we are with that, okay? And it's pretty much ready to go. What was the second part of the question?
How do you persuade the actors in the supply chain, because lots of different people involved in that, to actually engage with this technology? Because there's maybe someone who might say, well, I'm not interested in that. If I'm going to be penalised, for example, if the temperature drops below a certain temperature, I'm not interested in using that. I'll just use the old way of doing things. We know we actually knew it was getting warm or cold. Does that make sense?
It's an interesting question, I have to say.
The question, just for the thing, was round about how do you persuade somebody to take part where actually they might lose out? And I guess it depends on the power of the ecosystem, yeah, it is. It's the power of the ecosystem. And if there's a regulatory scenario where it has to happen, then that, you know, if the regulator says this is how we're going to do it, then people will have to comply to take part and to do business. But often it's the power of the ecosystem.
And there's one big example, which is food trust, which is the provenance of food, so which farm it came from and all that sort of stuff. In that case, it was Walmart who said to the people in their supply chain, look, we're going to do this, so you don't have any choice, right? So typically there's one big powerful person in the middle who says, look, we're doing it this way, you've got to do it this way. And you can see Tesco will do it in the UK, or IKEA will do it in their industry, and they'll just make it happen, right?
That makes sense, actually.
Yeah.
How do we pick that? Sorry, I saw my hand first, but we'll remember to come back here.
When you approach a new actor that you want to bring in the mix, like I think you're doing in transport, are you facing problems with the stigma that is attached to blockchain from the cryptocurrency speculations or so? Because I've got that at small scale. I was wondering if you had the same.
Did that? Do you want me to repeat that?
Yeah. Please.
So the question there was when we're talking to the actors, the people who might have an interest or could have an interest, so they've got a use case for blockchain. Are we addressing the stigma? So yeah, pretty much. So when we are, certainly I think my experience, there are a number of different ways you might have the conversation with the client, but often having had that introduction, it's a case of, this is actually how we see blockchain working, these are the use cases, this is why we think there's benefit, and actually talk to the clients about their use cases and get them to work out what they are as well. Because there's a load of use cases where people are going, blockchain's the answer, and like, it's not actually, it's just a database. It's fine to just have a database, that is okay. So yeah, we have those conversations, and most of the time people are like, oh okay, there's sort of a light bulb moment. And so.
Yeah, and there is a lot of confusion that blockchain is virtual currency, right? A lot of people still think that, and it really isn't. I mean, virtual currency is like this big, and the rest of blockchain will deliver transactions in the new world, which is so much bigger. There is a part which says that companies have been raising money through ICOs, the initial coin offerings, right? And you need a virtual currency to do that, okay? And there's been a lot of hype about it in good and bad ways, right? There's been a lot of money raised, but there's concerns that it's been raised for illegal purposes or not used very well, right? But I think every blockchain fabric needs the ability to have an ICO happen for companies that want to raise money that way, right? And Hyperledger and the other permissioned fabrics like Hyperledger typically didn't have a currency associated with them, but I think that'll change, right? So Hyperledger now has a side project which will turn into a currency in the future for ICOs and things like that.
The other misunderstanding that some of my colleagues had right at the start of when we started talking about this was that the blockchain was just another integration bus or another integration layer, and it's like, well, it's slightly different from that, and so we had that to do internally in terms of education as well. We said we'd answer your question.
Yeah, I have a question about how you onboard physical things to the blockchain.
Yeah.
So, as I've always understood and interacted with blockchains, they have a native currency, and that's the thing that transacts throughout the blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain. The creation of Bitcoins is hard-coded into it, and so it makes complete sense for me how that moves through the system. It also makes sense how you would move a diamond through the system once it's in the system. It's easy to track then, but how do you get it in? How do you get a physical diamond onto the blockchain, and how do you verify all of that bit of it?
Yeah, well, there's got to be a way of identifying the thing. And there's another use case which is similar, which I'll just mention now, which is we're working with a company who ship whiskey, so it's kind of relevant to where we are, whiskey from here to the Far East, and it's typically quite expensive stuff, right? So it's £30 a bottle up to £250 a bottle. And that's all fine, right? They've done that for a long time. But there's an issue that somewhere between here and there, somebody takes the whiskey out of the bottle and replaces it with cheap stuff, right? So you might buy a very expensive bottle of whiskey in the Far East, and what you get when you open it, the bottle looks fine, the bottle's exactly as it should be, but what's in it is not fine, right? And they're going to use blockchain for provenance. That doesn't fix the problem, right? Because you can still get to the Far East and open it, and there could be the wrong thing inside. But what it lets you do is once you find that there's been a problem, you can track back through the supply chain. You know where it's been and whose hands it's been through, and you can find the crook really quickly, and you can get rid of them. You can take them out. All right, so that's how that's going to be used. But to your question, you need some way of identifying the thing, right? In the whiskey example, there is now a way to check whether it's the right sort of whiskey without opening the bottle, right? You shine a laser through it and it tells you the chemical makeup and the impurities in it, and that can identify it without you having to open it. With a diamond, it's a similar thing, right? You can either laser cut a barcode in there, which is tiny, which doesn't affect the diamond to our big eyes, or you can actually, with a diamond, you can identify it through other means, right? Through the clarity, the imperfections, the little cracks in it, this sort of thing. Okay, but you have to bring it into the blockchain in that way.
That all has to happen at source, not at the end user.
Yes, correct.
Okay, and I, obviously, without an understanding of these supply chains, I just assume that they're more equipped when they're selling to the end user, whether they're identifying strawberries or diamonds or whiskey, that the mine or whatever isn't going through those processes. Maybe I'm way off.
Yeah, no, they'll have to in the future, right? So if you pull a diamond out of the ground, you'll have to do the checks to identify that diamond at source at the mine before it's shipped. Okay, and that's the future. Or if you're a farmer just about to ship strawberries, you'll use an app on your phone to scan the unit. It might be a small package, or it might be a pallet, or it might be a container, but there'll be an identifier on it, and you use an app on your phone, which is the way that it gets into the blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, you can chip a horse or a cow. In terms of when you get to the end of the supply chain and somebody's eating a lasagna and discovers that it's not cow, it's horse in it, that's when you get right back to the, well, there's a problem with in the farm, unless somebody switched something in the middle of it. And so the idea, the beauty of the blockchain is that you get to, where the problem is. Because you can't get to the point where you can identify every single tiny bit of mince and relate it to a cow, unfortunately. But yeah, there are challenges and responsibilities on each party to be doing the right thing.
I was just wondering, I got into blockchain for the kind of humanitarian side of it, and I was just wondering if there was any more, like, so there's the commercial side, but is there any sort of, like, you say releasing the extra worldwide 5% GDPR, so is there anything that you are working with in that more sphere, where it's more kind of helping people in other countries that are perhaps less well off than ourselves, or reaching the unbanked in the world?
That's
We probably need to repeat that question. So the question was around about, are there any more humanitarian use cases looking at helping other people in parts of the world, the unbanked? I'm going to go travel and transportation. I haven't actually thought much of it.
So it's happening. I know it's happening, and I've been approached on LinkedIn by people who are trying to set this up, right, in Africa in particular, where a lot of people don't have access to banking, and they're looking to set up virtual currencies and virtual banks using blockchains to give them the banking that will let them lift themselves out of poverty, and let them do some investment in the future. I'd say it's very early. I don't know any projects which are being built out right now, but I know there's some people with some good ideas.
So my question is, I suppose, is IBM doing that?
Not yet, no. We'd like to. We'd like to find a partner to do it with. So if you know anybody, shout, and we'd love to do exactly that sort of thing. Right? IBM's a bit different to most big technology companies. We're not just about the money. We do a lot of pure research, and we're very proud to be a bit different, actually.
Yeah. There's probably some use cases around about charitable organisations and how money is used in disaster, that kind of thing, and making sure it's put in the right way. But I haven't thought about those sort of things, unfortunately, just with the hat I have on. There's more, I think, the blue one. Yep, that's you.
You mentioned you use Hyperledger with the Verse projects. For the other use cases you gave for like WeTrade and stuff, did you use Hyperledger as well? And do you primarily just use Hyperledger, or do you use anything else for that?
Do you want me to?
On you go. I can answer, but
no, you go. It's your turn.
Well, no. So the platform that we build is based on Hyperledger and Hyperledger Fabric. We built a Hyperledger Composer to make it slightly easier to build the blockchain that you require. So that's kind of from a technology perspective. That's mostly where we're invested. However, we do have a services organisation that, where necessary, will work with other things too. So just like we've got a huge software stack of middleware and digital and stuff like that, this organisation, while they might usually try and pick an IBM thing. They might not pick an IBM thing depending on the client scenario, but largely it's Hyperledger. That's our strategy.
Yeah, so we don't own Hyperledger, right? It's a Linux Foundation project. It's open to everybody, right? And there's a lot of companies jointly developing it. And right now we're 100% Hyperledger, but there's no reason we couldn't change that in the future if we need to. And quite a few companies are backing multiple horses, right? Right now, IBM's 100% Hyperledger.
Could you expand a bit on the pluggable nature of the Hyperledger project?
The pluggable nature?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You could use various bits of...
Yeah, so...
Various bits can be plugged in.
Yeah, but we think it's really important that you have a few options, right? And particularly with the consensus engine, I think it's really important that you get some choice, right? So we'll have pluggable consensus in Hyperledger Fabric coming in 1.3, I think, which is scheduled for the end of September. And I think the open standards nature of it is really important. That's one of the reasons why, if it's open standard, you get much more flexibility and pluggability. But also because it evolves really quickly, because a lot of people are developing this from different companies, the speed of evolution of the blockchain will be much faster. You know, it's just bound to be. And you know, that's a really important point, I've got to say, and that's one of the reasons that we really believe in Linux Foundation and open source development.
Is it not Hyperledger's, is that not Linux's fastest growing project ever?
Ever, yes.
Yeah.
So given that they had Firefox and a number of other things, that's quite a statement.
Yeah.
So my question is about if you work with Maersk, what about Maersk competitors? Are they going to come on the same blockchain as well? And who actually owns the blockchain in that case?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Do you want to do it?
No.
Well, I think there's a big first mover's advantage in any industry to getting your blockchain up and working, right? Because standards will have to form, okay? And the shipping industry probably will standardize around some future technology, right? If you're the first one out, like Maersk and IBM hope to be, then you stand a good chance of being, you know, one of those standards going forward. So we're currently in a joint venture with Maersk, right? And we will jointly own the intellectual capital, but there's various different models available, okay? That's one of the first things you need to do. When you pull a group of companies together to build something, you need to decide who owns the intellectual capital. If you sell it in the future, who gets the money? That's one of the biggest discussion points, and that typically takes the longest time in getting a blockchain project off the ground.
Yeah, but if you're going to, you can't, if you make this thing for Maersk, right, and IBM, you're the IP for it, then the competing company, K-Line or whatever it is, they can't get into it. Right? It's not open then, because they can't own the intellectual property. They can't make the changes that they might want to make for their systems without going through Maersk or IBM. So I don't really understand how that's an actually really open system for doing projects.
So for the global trade thing, which is built by IBM and Maersk, other companies outside can buy into that and use it as a platform, right? But you're absolutely right, they won't control the platform in that case, they'll only be able to build on top of it. So they've got a choice, they can either buy into it and use it, or they build something of their own. I mean, that's the choice they're going to have to make.
Or it could be, someone else could make an open platform that anyone, a true distributed system that anyone could, a decentralized system.
Yeah, so it's like I said, there will need to be standardization in all the different industries on how they build systems in the new blockchain world. And it's going to be an interesting 3 or 4 years, I've got to say.
You mentioned licensing and IP, and I'm wondering if you know of any use cases where people are looking at using blockchain. You were talking about tracking things that happened in the supply chain, but tracking the development of IP, collaborative developments of IP. Are you aware of anything like that? I mean, I know that GitHub does it.
Yeah.
I don't know of any people that are, or any projects that are. Actually, so the thing I did in Lisbon, we did one the year before as well, and the one we did, it was again, we were experimenting, we were having fun. We did it for the intellectual capital or property that might be jokes. My German colleague suggested that. I was astonished and loved
Really?
it. And he went and found a whole bunch of Scottish jokes that we could use, and look at how often those jokes have been told and they've been repeated by other people, because that happens a lot. You know, you have people who are your joke writers, your comedy writers, that kind of thing, not necessarily always delivering and things get stolen. So we were looking at the history of a joke and who's stealing it and who's changing it enough that it's different and who's actually keeping it so similar that it's the same. So we built a bit of AI, natural language processing, into that as well, just for fun, because that's what we did. So that I think there are definitely use cases for it, but I can't think of if we're talking to people about it.
I mean, digital rights or IP rights is going to be a big area for blockchain. So our big CTO, John McLean, has got this question that he often asks, which is, we all pretty much have iTunes, right, or some kind of digital music library and digital content library. What happens when you die? What happens to those rights? Do you know what happens to it today? It's lost, it's gone. You can't pass it on, you can't pass it off in your will. That's lost, right? And that's the current position. That obviously isn't going to be the future. The future will be a bit more sensible than that, right? Because you own it, you should be able to pass it on. And that sort of digital rights will be interesting in the future.
Who's watching the watches? Because you've got all this stuff encoded into the blockchain.
Yeah.
I'm a poor programmer. My mate's a poor tester. And now my shipping level's wrong. Forever. How's that being addressed?
So it's not necessarily wrong forever, because if somebody notices there's a problem, then you can go in and then change your smart contracts or whatever it is in your chain code. So the previous is wrong, but then you can move forward being right. So if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
So it's not a write once ledger then?
It is write once, but then if you change your smart contract, you decide you need to capture more data or different data, you can then, so it becomes a piece of a block itself that you've made the change. You know, there's a transaction, and then you can correct things in the future. You can't change all of the stuff you did wrong, but you can make sure it's right in the future. So there is that. But yeah, watching the watches is really interesting, and I guess that's where you do need to be. That's where the hard stuff comes in. So actually the blockchain's easy. The hard stuff is around about some of the governance of what you're doing in your processes, and from a development perspective, and from a business perspective, and how you're bringing that together, and whether the regulators are going to be, if there's a regulator in your particular chain, you know, what role do they play, and how do they govern as well.
Yeah. Regulators in general love this stuff, right? Because they can get more control and more visibility, right? Actually, just hold that one for a second, because there's another question further back, wasn't there? Yes. Yes, that's you.
Yeah. Could you explain a bit more in detail who is running these blockchains in this kind of use cases? So, how many nodes do you have? Where is the ledger? Is it something IBM provides to the companies, or each company has its own copies?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question
is, who is running the blockchain?
Yeah, so who is running the blockchain, and if there's a network of different companies collaborating, where is the compute running, and where is the data? Do you want me to do it?
If you want, everywhere.
Well, basically, yeah. I think it's really important, again, that people have choice. So if we take the WeTrade example, which is the network of banks working together, that's all going to run in the cloud, okay? For IBM, we'd prefer people to use the IBM cloud, which is a good cloud, because we have some bespoke tooling on there, which is really cool. But you can have a heterogeneous situation where some of the members of that network are running in the IBM cloud, some are on Azure, some are on AWS, and actually some of them could be running in-house, right? So some of the nodes could be in somebody's data center, some could be in the cloud or in different clouds. And that's the situation that we're designing for right now, is that we expect in the future people will have the choice about putting it on the cloud or in their own data center and any cloud they want.
And if you think about this as assets, you know, whether it's money or a ball bearing or whatever it is, you know, rather than everyone having their own ledger, in their own environments. Now there's one ledger in each environment rather than 20 different ledgers. If that makes sense. So still, everyone still has their own copy, because you need to do that whole thing round about agreement and so on and so forth. But it's one ledger. It's not 20 different ledgers.
And
in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and it becomes complicated, right? So say you've got 20 nodes or 20 peers in a blockchain, and they're scattered around different networks or different clouds, and you move from version 1.2 of the blockchain fabric to 1.3. How do you roll that out in such a way that it continues to work, given that the compute's scattered all over the place? It becomes an interesting problem, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier on, is it's the traditional IT things we've got to relearn in that context. And that's what we've been doing for things like WeTrade and Maersk. Okay.
Sorry, are you finding this that people are tending to form chains vertically across the supply chain more than horizontally across, say, competitors in the same thing? Or so would, say, all the different shipping companies be part of the same chain? Or is it like one shipping company?
It's going to be a mixture of probably both scenarios. I mean, if you look at the Maersk thing, for example, you know, there are other supply chain organisations that want to be part of that, because they might not be the bit that does the boat, but they might be the bit that's then the truck that gets it to a van that gets it to your house. You know, so there's going to be across the ecosystem, and then competitors competing actually who still need to interact. It will just depend on the particular use case scenario that they have. For example, so for ticketing, you know, that's going to be a whole bunch of competitors potentially. Think about rail. Okay, there might not be much of a competition to ScotRail, but you can get on an East Coast train, or you can get on a West Coast train. You know, so there's things around about ticketing where they would maybe want to all collaborate, even though they might not want to all collaborate.
Yes, I was really interested in a slightly different point about your loyalty system. How you said, like, it's quite annoying having all these different loyalty cards, but if you were able to create or have one system where you could access loyalty points for different things, you're not really worried that might be really highly susceptible to exploitation?
Oh yeah, probably. And it might not be that every airline wants to have exactly the same points anyway. I know Avios has kind of gone in and out of Flybe, and then so there might not just be one loyalty scheme ever. You know, there's still going to be potentially a Boots Nectar, whatever, those kind of scenarios. But
you're essentially just connecting lots and lots of dots surrounding one person, and then that would be for like every person will have to like blockchain of their loyalty profile. They like to buy stuff here, and we can send them down maybe tailored offers, which in a sense is very good, but is it not? Does that seem a bit, I don't know, like just having all that connected together, that all these different people could maybe access? Am I going off on a wrong? Am I getting
No, you're right. So I think the question is really around about privacy here, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, so they're going to have whoever implements that kind of thing. They're going to have to think about how they do this. And also, if when you're signing up, you know, you've got to think about things like consent and who you're happy to share information with, that kind of thing. I mean, there are discussions. I think it's IATA, no, it's CETA. Like airline type organisations looking at our actual identities. There's, I mean, who's joined doc.io, where in theory you're in charge of your data about person, so you can connect LinkedIn and Google to it, and in theory you're in charge of your data and which organisations get to see it. So there's going to be some of those aspects that need to be thought about from a loyalty perspective as well. So yeah, there's probably loads of pitfalls. Just these things need to be thought through properly. And also, you know, I wouldn't expect that kind of scenario to let me see your data.
Yeah.
You know, maybe Boots are next, depending on the airport or whatever. But yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, there was a scary thing that I saw the other day. I think it was in the Digit newsletter. The amount of information that's on your boarding pass. Don't give it to anyone. Shred it. If it's on your phone, it's maybe not quite so bad. But yeah, there's a load of information on there that's personal stuff that just shred it.
Hey, connected to what someone else was asking as well as Jack, with taking the Maersk example in shipping and the ownership of that supply chain, who's able to look onto the transactions that happen and verify them, who actually has access to all that? Is it IBM? Is it NERSC? Is it a third-party regulator? Who gets visibility of that? You know, the 20, you have 26 steps or something in some of those flowcharts. Who's looking at that?
It's a really good question, eh?
The reality is, it will be set up in such a way that depending on what act or what actor role you kind of have, you will be able to see different parts of the information that's flowing, and that's all the sort of thing that'll be set up by IBM and NERSC and agreed, but also agreed with some of the other parties that are part of the.
And if you run a node, right, you're a company that runs a peer, a blockchain peer, you will have a full copy of the ledger on that peer, but you won't be able to see it all. You will only be authorised to see the parts that you should see, and there's various ways of doing that. We use channels or collections, which is technical stuff that limits what you can see. There's big GDPR implications as well, right? Because you've got a immutable write only once ledger, which is in multiple different places, and what happens if you want to delete something from that immutable ledger? Okay, there's considerations there that are going to be tricky to sort out.
I'm just wondering, do IBM almost become like the Uber of global shipping, the people who oversee and facilitate shipping of goods around the entire world without owning a single shipping vessel themselves, or without ever shipping anything themselves? They just own the data and the processes behind it.
Yeah, that's not our aspiration, though.
Okay, all right.
We're trying to facilitate companies who might want to do that, but we're facilitators rather than taking over the world.
So one of the things we make really clear, although usually when we're talking about artificial intelligence and data and analytics and that sort of thing, is that unlike some other organisations, we don't take your data and then do stuff with it. We might do if you ask us to, but then we'll give you the results back. It's not for us to then go away and play with and that kind of thing. So we're not in a scenario with any of our client projects or that we, more data, let's go and do something. That's not kind of how we work. So if we want to train things from an artificial intelligence perspective, we'll be getting the data in an ethical way that's not where we're just borrowing it from we worked on a really good banking project over here. Yeah, let's just take that stuff and train it. It's not kind of how we work. I feel like I've gone off.
No, it's a good tangent. And on the same tangent, I always wondered, being a Terminator fan, who would be Cyberdyne Systems, right? And it might actually be us, because we're right into the artificial intelligence and we're into all kinds of kind of really leading edge technology. So. Yeah. Should we stop on that?
Yeah, no? Let's do that. The platform technology. And the thing is, if we are a first stakeholder in, so I don't know the ins and outs in the contract with NERSC, so I'm guessing a couple of things, but we're more likely to be the platform provider rather than necessarily a real interactor or stakeholder. But if we were a stakeholder like some of the others, or an actor like some of the others, we would have the bits right that was agreed that IBM can see. Yeah.
I think, was that a clue that we need to stop the lights going on? Well, I certainly for one will go next door and have a beer, and if you want to chat over a beer, I'd be very happy to do that. You able to stay for a little bit?
I can stay a little while, yeah.
Yeah. So, should we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.